Hello, this is James Rees from Razorthorn for another edition of Razorwire. Today we're going to be doing episode 2 of the PCI DSS piece that we're doing at the moment, where we kind of go over PCI DSS, some tips and tricks of the trade, what to expect, that kind of thing. Episode 1 was very much kind of like the basics, very much the basics. Today what I'd like to talk about is selecting your QSA. Okay, now this is quite a common thing that people are going to have to go through. PCI DSS can be quite complicated, especially if you have an organisation or you're part of an organisation going through the process with multiple revenue streams of any reasonable size. So quite often, what people are going to do is they're going to start thinking, right, we need to get some assistance on this one to make sure that we go through this, knowing what we need to do, getting through the project, and then finally meeting final compliance by going through an audit. As I mentioned in the previous video, there's 2 types of methods to get through sort of PCI DSS from an audit perspective. The first one is obviously an SAQ. SAQ is a self-assessment questionnaire. Depending on the type of business that you're performing, will depict really which SAQ you are required to meet. The other way of doing this is getting a QSA to do a full report on compliance. Now, there's a tiering system, which I'm probably going to go through in another video, so I won't cover that now. Whether or not you're in an SAQ country or whether or not you're required to do a ROC, basically, quite often, the question will come up, do we need to get a QSA in to help us out? There's no easy answer to that. If you've got experience with compliance, then you could try and go it alone. If you have no kind of background in compliance or information security or anything like that, then sometimes it's a good idea to procure some skills from somebody who does. Now, there's plenty of people out there who say that they're qualified within PCI DSS, but really what you're looking for is either a QSA, somebody who has been a QSA and can prove that they've been a QSA, or PCIP. Now, PCIP is a PCI professional. It's not a QSA. It's kind of like an entry-level PCI certification. People who perform that have gone through some significant training on what PCI DSS is, and that kind of thing. They're great as a resource, but if you are looking to go down and complete a ROC or get a ROC audit done on you, ROC stands for Report on Compliance, by the way. I'm not sure if I covered that in the last video. Then you probably want to really seriously look at getting a QSA or somebody who's been a QSA recently. In order to be a QSA, you have to be part of a QSA company. Razorthorn is. We are mandated by the card brands through the Security Council to be able to audit against PCI DSS. Now, as a general rule, it's a good idea if you are having to go for a ROC to look quite early for a QSA, so they can kind of go through the motions with you on what to expect for your audit. Again, audits themselves I'm going to cover in another session, but when you're selecting the QSA, you need to be really careful. QSAs are not cheap to procure as a general rule, and I'd be wary of any QSA or somebody who says they're a QSA who's kind of offering up their services for really cheap. There's usually a reason for that. QSAs in the UK and Europe have a tendency to be quite expensive. I know in the States they're probably a little bit more expensive than we are in the UK, but it's well worthwhile. Because these are the people who they know the standard. We have to adhere to the standard, understand what's going on with the standard, and we have to be recertified on a yearly basis. So every single year we have to redo the PCI DSS QSA exam. And I mean, that takes 3 or 4 days, it can take a bit longer. You do have to go through the course all over again. It's all kind of CBT training these days, so it's relatively easy, and you can kind of dip in and out of the course throughout your day-to-day work. We're all busy people. At the end of it, you have to retake the exam. You have to hit the minimum standard. Once you hit the minimum standard, it gets submitted to the Security Council, who verify everything and will then update your listings on the PCI DSS SSC website. There is a list of QSAs, so if somebody says they're a QSA, it's always a good idea to go to the Security Council's website and have a look on the listings. There's a section in there for QSA assessors. And you can verify that the company that's selling you the PCI DSS people, consultants, whatever, are actually validated and are QSA companies. And then you can also check the individual with the last name first initial to actually double check to make sure that they're a current QSA and that there's no problems. Assuming all of that is done. The next real question is to whittle down the amount of, the QSA that you want. I would urge everybody when you're selecting a QSA to interview a couple of QSAs. Really what you're looking for is somebody who understands definitely the sector that your organization works in, that they understand and have worked with the kind of revenue streams that you're doing, where you're taking card payments, be it over the phone by some kind of call center, e-commerce. There's any number of ways of getting cardholder data through the works. So it's usually a good idea to kind of have some conversations with the QSAs you have in mind to establish whether or not they know your space and they know what they're doing in your space. Things to remember, however, the more experienced the QSA, the more expensive they tend to be. Most organizations will have kind of normal standard QSAs who maybe have been doing it for a year or two, a couple of years. And then you'll have the senior QSAs who've been doing it for quite a long time, maybe 5 years, a bit longer. And then you have the principal QSAs. Those are the really expensive ones, but those are the ones with the most experience. And normally, sort of 10 years plus. You get what you pay for is the old adage here. I'm not saying that QSAs who haven't been QSAs for long don't know a lot. There's a lot of very good sort of QSAs who are younger in the tooth than some of the older QSAs. But it depends on your appetite. It depends on how much you want to pay for. It depends on whether you like the QSA, and it depends on whether or not that QSA's got knowledge within your space. The older the QSA is in the trade, the longer they've been a QSA, the more environments they would have audited. I have audited hundreds of environments over the years. I've pretty much seen every type of environment there is. Pretty much every type of environment there is. I've done large companies, I've done small companies, I've done medium-sized companies. The process is always pretty much the same. And again, the process for a QSA when they come on board, I'll go over in another video. There's a lot of other videos I need to do because there's a lot to cover. But when you're selecting your QSA, really what you're looking for is somebody who's reasonable, measured in their approach, somebody who can relate to you and your team, somebody who can sit down and help you through that kind of whole process, whether or not you just use them on the audit or whether you're using them for helping you get through that initial project in order to get to the audit itself. By having a good relationship with the QSA, you get to know their quirks, their nuances, how they like to work. And over time, what tends to happen, the more you use that QSA, the more used to your environment they get. So audits can become a little bit quicker. We still have to do the due diligence on every single requirement that applies to you and verify that requirements are not applicable and all the usual stuff. A good QSA will have a process that they will follow and they will educate you on that process as part of that initial engagement. But once they get to know your environment, the process for auditing gets a little bit easier than if you're getting new QSAs in every single year to do it. Every time you get a new QSA in, they're going to want to do a full scoping on you. I kind of went through a bit of that in that first video. A scoping is really where the QSA will engage with the customer to kind of assess what the payment streams are, how they work, what environments they touch, the people who are involved in it, and so on and so forth. Everything related to those massive set of PCI DSS requirements. So if you do decide you want to swap a QSA every year, fair enough, that's down to you to decide, but just bear in mind they're going to want to do a scoping every single year. Even if you do retain a QSA, they'll want to have kind of almost like catch-up calls with you kind of before the next audit, just to make sure that they've caught any particular changes. Maybe you've introduced a new revenue stream or a way of taking card payments, or you've expanded the way you take card payments. Maybe you've changed your third-party providers. So there will be an element of every year of the QSA just checking in with you, which obviously does cost. It will take a day, a couple of days, depends on the size of your environment, just to validate that everything is either the same as it was last year, or whether or not there's additional items that need to be taken into consideration. QSAs have to be very methodical, and we're taught to be very methodical. When we become QSAs, we have to go through from requirement 1 all the way through to the end of requirement 12, and we have to validate absolutely everything. I'll go through a general process for doing that again in other videos. A very, very long set of videos this is going to be. Once you've gotten your QSA, it's time for you to bring them in, sit them down, and work with them through that scoping. Okay, they will have a look at your environment. They will let you know of any specific challenges that you have. Every organisation has challenges. Some organisations find some requirements easy and other requirements hard. Other organisations will find, again, some requirements relatively easy compared to the other company that they've just been dealing with, but others that they have a bit of a challenge to meet, especially if there's a lot of compensatory controls. That's a whole new discussion in itself. Keep the QSA abreast of the situation as well. Most of us have catch-up calls with our customers, sometimes biannually, sometimes before the audit. It depends. I've got customers that we've been doing PCI audits for years and years and years. I'm talking 10 years plus. So I've gotten to know their environments very well. I've gotten to know their people very well. Their people know what to expect when they come. I come on site and begin my audit. We'll celebrate once an audit goes through, if it obviously goes through with a pass, and everybody hopefully has a reasonable time of it. I mean, an audit's never fun. Being on the other side of the fence, I have been on the other side of the fence before I became a QSA. It was when PCI was extremely, sorry about that. So yeah, basically, once you've gotten your QSA and you've gotten to know your QSA, you can have a good working relationship with that QSA for years. Now, there is wisdom in occasionally changing that QSA. Some organisations do that. Other organisations like to stick with their QSA because they've gotten to know the individual, and that individual's gotten to know their environment. So, it's totally down to you guys to decide, but make sure you do carefully vet any QSA that comes through. Make sure that their certifications are up to date. Make sure they come from a valid QSA company. Be wary of third parties when they pull you in front of their own PCI professionals or their own QSAs. One thing to remember is your QSA is auditing you. Okay, just because you've got a third party who brought their own QSA into some meetings doesn't mean you're going to get through the audit. They are working in the interest of their customer, which is that third party. You need to bring your QSA, who you have, in to work with you, because they are the ones that are going to be doing the audit, and they can quite often pick up on anything that they're not happy with, or something that they want to just go in a little bit more depth with before the actual audit. Some organisations also like to do a kind of a bit of a pre-audit. It's almost a bit like a scoping, an initial scoping with a customer, but it's where the QSA and the members of the company that are facilitating that QSA will kind of go over the broad points within PCI with that QSA, just to validate, as I said before, nothing has changed, that their posture is still good, and they're still in a situation where it's likely they're going to pass an audit. Audits can be very, very stressful. Audits can also take a long time. You have to be wary of that. Audits have become a little bit more complex since the pandemic started, because obviously, there's a lot of restrictions now on travel, a lot of restrictions of attending customer sites. But normally, in a normal world before pandemic and hopefully after pandemic, your QSA is always going to be usually attending your corporate office, visiting locations where you're taking car payments, maybe your data centers. It very much depends on your environment. Finding the right QSA for you is really, really key. Most QSAs have been around the block a few times. Most of them are really nice people as a general rule. But make sure that your QSA is right for you before you kind of engage with them in any kind of long-term contractual agreement. Shop around. There's plenty of organisations out there. There's plenty of QSAs out there. If you have any questions on the selection process for a QSA, let me know. If you've got any comments on QSAs, feel free to let me know as well. I'd be more than happy to address them in future videos. It's probably something I've heard before many times. If you've got any comments or you want any further information on anything, let us know. Down in the description, you'll find how to communicate with us, how to get in touch with us. Please feel free to subscribe, press the little bell button, and to get notifications, and then leave a like if you like, or a comment. That'd be great. Look after yourselves. Speak to you soon. Goodbye.